Right, so being in South Florida, we're about as far from rock climbing as you can possibly be. So I thought I'd start with a little video to give you context. But for those of you that don't know, what I do for a living is that. I live my life on the side of the biggest rock walls in the world, and I climb them. And so you might be wondering, what does this have to do with climate change activism? Turns out, a fair amount. You see, my sport is most often practiced in some of the most hard to get to places in the world, places that aren't really that touched by human hands. High elevation places, places way off the ground like this, like the side of El Capitan. Polar regions like this, sometimes I go to northern Alaska or Antarctica and climb. And then a little bit closer to home, sometimes in just the middle of our national parks, but this is in the bottom of the Grand Canyon on the first ascent of this really beautiful crack that I did about 10 years ago. And to be successful at my sport, you have to learn to notice everything, from the smallest to the biggest details. In fact, much of the time, our life actually depends on getting those details right. And when that's the case, you notice the change. And I think that's why these days, the outdoor community is really stepping up and becoming part of this climate change conversation. There's a lot of nonprofits like Protect Our Winners, the Access Fund, and the American Alpine Club that are really stepping up. But there's also private sector people stepping up as well. But you know what? We've been telling the story of climate change for a lot of years. And honestly, I think we've been getting it wrong. But who can blame us? I mean, the problems in our sport are actually pretty real. This is a picture of El Capitan in 2012. El Cap's the wall that I was climbing at in the first video. Here it is 4 years later. That's a big change. Beetle kill has had, the drought has allowed beetles to move into Yosemite Valley and kill most of the pine trees. And then a little bit closer to home, this kind of stuff is happening. This is my home in Estes Park, Colorado, where a couple of years ago, the two biggest fires in Colorado history came in and surrounded our town and somehow didn't burn the whole town down. But also in the more remote places like this is one of my favorite mountains in the world. This is called Fitzroy. I actually named my son Fitz after this mountain. And this sits in the southern part of Argentina, and it's a place that I won't go anymore, basically, because the mountain, which has been frozen together for millennia, now has these super warm spells that come through. That's usually the best time to climb when it's warm. But every time it gets warm, some climber dies because of rockfall. But, you know, we talk about these problems, and we don't get a lot of traction. Turns out that's not how the brain works. People don't want to hear about problems, especially climbers. They want to know that their life is going to be radical or bitchin', as my friend Amy McNeely would say. They want to know that we're going to send the gnar, not plummet to our death. In all seriousness, if there is one thing climbers are all about, it's imagining improbable solutions and making them a reality. This guy right here, Yvon Chouinard, is one of my biggest heroes. I work for his company, Patagonia. And when he started Patagonia, I guess almost 50 years ago, he didn't realize how bad making clothing was for the environment. But he pretty quickly realized it was bad, and so he started to make changes. At first, it started small, things like organic cotton, regenerative agriculture, switching to recycled materials. But more recently, he's been making systematic change, things like starting 1% for the planet, or a platform called ActionWorks where people can get connected with local nonprofits to donate money and get involved. And his biggest thing that he's done lately is he decided to give his $1.5 billion company away. Most billionaires, they take the money and run at some point. He decided to start a legal structure that would make sure that all the money went to environmental nonprofits, our planet, forever. That's a pretty cool idea. Enough about Yvon, though. I want to go back to talking about me. You might have noticed the kind of awkward lineup of people tonight. A lot of politicians, scientists, and then one random dirtbag climber guy. I think there's a reason I got invited here tonight, and that's because years ago, climbing was kind of this weird sport for nerds. But more recently, it's become kind of cool, weirdly. There's this whole genre of climbing films that you can go on Netflix and watch. And what that means is that people have started using us for branding in weird ways. Like when we do new climbs, sometimes the president will tweet about us. That's pretty weird. But you know what? I'll take it. It gives us the chance to get into the room. In 2017, I went to my first lobbying event in Washington, D.C. It was an event called Climb the Hill, and it was organized by the American Alpine Club and the Access Fund. And I had this kind of sleazy idea of politicians as just these kind of power-hungry mongers who were trying to take us down. But honestly, when I got in the halls of Congress and started to sit down with people, I realized that it wasn't that way. These are real people talking about real solutions. And I actually found it kind of fun to go and lobby. And so I go back now on occasion. I've gone back many times to advocate for issues like the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And I've gotten myself in some pretty cool situations. Like I found myself on Senator Schumer's porch one day with two of the best climbers in the world, Sausage Julian and Alex Honnold. I also had dinner with Senator Mike Lee once. That was kind of a trip. I've taken Senator Hickenlooper climbing, got him a couple way off the ground, shaking in his boots. Kind of wish that was Mike Lee, actually. Anyways, we don't, and one thing I've learned is when I go on these lobbying trips, we don't always agree on the means. But one thing we do agree on is that this country and this world is an incredible place, and we need to figure out how to protect it. And that gives me hope. And while I've had a great time in DC, I've learned that lawmakers do hold a lot of the cards, but ultimately, it's the voters that vote those people into be. So we not only work from the top-down approach, going straight to the lawmakers, but these days the outdoor industry is really trying to come from the bottom up as well. So functionally, what does this mean for us now? A few years ago, I came across an idea in an environmental film about Tongass National Forest called ground truthing. And the idea comes from this premise that if we want to really love nature enough to protect it, we need to experience it in its rawest form. We need to get covered in it. We need to eat it. We need to climb the biggest mountains and look straight into the eyes of the wolves, like I did on this trip to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and let it overwhelm us. And if we do that, we'll have no chance but to no other option but to fall in love with it. And speaking of love, if there's one belief I want to install in my children, that's my daughter. I actually love her more than my robe. But if there's one belief I want to instill in her and my kids, it is that while my generation and my parents' generation might have left us in a terrible mess, they get the opportunity to fix it. They can be the superheroes that literally save humanity. What kid doesn't want to be a superhero? Thank you so much.